So in this video, I'm going to show you guys how to take your headliner and install some of our pre-wired RGB LEDs to create really a TV on your headliner. It is a little bit limited, low res, but I'm going to show you kind of the app, some of the features of it, and give you an idea of what to expect if you attempt this project yourself. What's involved in doing it, most of the tools that you're going to need, and just the process that I finally kind of figured out. This still kind of a work in progress. I'm sure there's some improvements to the process that could, somebody might be able to come up with. But overall, I'm really satisfied with the outcome. Can't wait to get this in the car. But I want to show you guys the just kind of what the process would be to give you guys an expectation, and just go over what all you're going to need to do it. So these are a lot of the tools that you're going to want. You're going to want a voltage meter, and the main reason for this is once you get all those LEDs done, you're going to want to check for continuity. Make sure that you don't have powers and grounds touching each other anywhere in the wiring. It is a lot of wiring, and this can save you a ton of headache. If you accidentally miswire one little thing, it can fry a whole lot of stuff. So I used this, it saved me. Definitely have a voltage meter that can read for continuity. And I mean, basically all that is you can see on this one, it's that little setting, and when I touch the probes together, it beeps to let you know that you have continuity. When you touch power and ground on your wiring before you plug everything in, you should not have continuity. So you're going to have to know your voltage meter and how you test for continuity. If you happen to have this one, it is that setting there. Sometimes it can be a little bit different, so know your voltage meter, how to test for that, because like in my case, it did save me. You're going to need a heat gun and some shrink tubing, just to keep everything clean. I mean, you can get away with electrical tape, but I would, for something as big as this, if you don't already have it, buy some shrink tubing. A heat gun, lighter will work. I think a heat gun works better. A soldering iron and some solder. Once again, you could twist the wires and use some tape, but last thing you want to do is have to pull your headliner back out because something's not working right later on. Solder is going to help you with that. So soldering iron is a good idea. You're going to want some chalk line, and I'll show you how we use that. But this was one of the things I figured out after I started that I wish I had thought of to begin with. So chalk line, good idea. A tape measure, that is something that you are definitely going to want to use to get your lines all lined up. A pick, somewhat of a thicker pick, and I will kind of show you what this is for, but basically poking holes in your material. Something to mark with, a Sharpie works well. I used these. Now these were mainly just to line up for the holes. So once I get everything started, I use these to center up this. This is a laser cut grid pattern, so that when I could get started in a corner, I could line this up, figure out where my main line was, put these on it. So you drill your first hole like dead center, and then I would put this through the hole and through the headliner to kind of secure it, and then I would put another one in a far corner after drilling a hole through there, and that would start my grid and kind of hold it, and then I could just go with the drill straight through each one of the holes. And that helped a lot, so that I didn't have to manually locate each single hole. You could probably get away with not doing this, but it's going to make it a lot easier if you do have access to a laser cutter. If you don't, let me know. I mean, it will cost extra, but you let me know your spacing. I can cut you a grid like this. My laser cutter can't cut much bigger of a sheet than that, but I can cut you a grid using a sheet this size to whatever specs you want. These are 1.5 inch spreads between each, and on my headliner they got about 1,000 LEDs. But obviously the denser you go, the better as far as pixelation. But you know, if you doubled up, you'd end up being like 4,000 LEDs. So I mean, you don't want to go like, you know, 1/2 inch, because that's going to be a ton. You could probably cut it down to 1 inch. You go much below that, your headliner will be Swiss cheese. It's going to be a heck of a lot of holes. So keep that in mind. I wouldn't go too dense for cost purposes and other things. Like I said, stability, sturdiness of the headliner itself. You still want it to have some structure to it. Wire strippers are always a good idea. This is another one you don't have to have, but it's going to help things. These are the LEDs that we sell. Basically, these are our 5mm RGB LEDs, but we had them, we had a special enclosure made for them, and then we had them pre-wired. And the wiring is pretty thin, and the enclosure is about 9mm width. But you can see it's got a little lip on there, which is really nice, because when you push this through the headliner, they stay inside. They don't fall out, so you won't need any glue to secure them. And this is, you know, only available through us currently. We developed the enclosures, and of course we're using our RGB 5mm, which do have the capacitors built in, so you don't have to wire any extra capacitors or anything like that to try to get them to work. So it does work really well. There's not a single capacitor added to my headliner, because everything is all built in. The one thing about these is the wiring is rather thin. You obviously cannot run power for 1,000 LEDs through this wire. You will need to power inject. I recommend that you power inject after every strand, so like before and after. One thing about these strands currently, and the next batch will get changed, so depending on when you're watching this video, it might already be updated, but currently it is bare wires. So you're going to have to add JSTs yourself, or in my case I just added JSTs and I tested each strand to make sure that I had them all wired up right. There are 3 colors, and I will try to get a better picture of it. But there are 3 colors on the wires themselves, and you just apply a little bit of heat, and it takes off like a coating that's over top of the wires, and that way you can get a good connection. If you're just adding JSTs, like crimping them on, the tips of the wires are actually already coated, or already they already have solder on them, so you've got a metal connection there, so you can do that and you'll be okay. But if you're trying to extend them, or if you're trying to strip them down and just solder them direct one to each other, you'll have to make sure you put enough heat to it with the soldering iron that you burn off the sheathing. It's kind of like a protective layer that goes over top of the wire. It'll have to be burned off with a soldering iron. The easiest way to tell is if the solder itself is taken to the wire, then you've got it off. The solder does not want to stick to the protective layer that's on the wiring, so once it burns off, the solder will stick to it no problem. You're also going to need a controller. I will be giving these away with kits. I haven't decided exactly how much, but I mean, you know, if you got 1 strand, you're not getting a controller. These are worth like $20, so but you know, if you buy 500 LEDs, I'll absolutely include a controller. I don't know what the cutoff is yet. I haven't decided where I need to be on them, but I want to make sure that you guys have these without having to, you know, go to Amazon or anything like that. I do have quite a few in stock, so they will be free with a kit, and I'll probably have them on the site to buy separately if you're doing something really small, but I can't afford to give them away free with just like a single strand of LEDs, unfortunately. You're also going to want some wire. Now, this is 14 gauge. I went a little bit overkill because I wasn't quite sure how much power this was going to draw. Surprisingly, I'm only drawing about 2 amps on this entire layout. And the reason being is that I'm running about 50% brightness. I just found that there was no real reason to run brighter than that. If, you know, it just turns into a tanning bed inside the car. But I did overbuild mine. If you think there might be a time when you're going to want to turn your brightness up, you definitely want to keep that in mind, because that 2 amps can quickly get up to, you know, 10 amps if you have enough LEDs and you turn it all the way up on white, let's say. So definitely keep that in mind. In general, it's not a whole lot of power, but for those moments where you decide that you want to spike that power up by turning things up, you definitely want to keep that in mind. So I used 14 gauge for the main power and 18 gauge to each of the sections, and I will show you that. Now these are 2 tools that I actually designed. One thing that I was noticing was, because of those ridges on the LEDs, it actually was killing my thumb trying to push them through. They're about a 9mm hole, so one thing I don't have here that you will want is a drill with a 9mm drill bit, and that'll be just the size that you need to drill the holes for the LEDs. It was killing my thumb pushing these through. So what I did is, instead of pushing these through by hand, I made this. Now originally the top was the size of an LED, so I could just put it right on top, push it down and push it in. I ended up realizing that was overkill. I didn't need that. So just a round, I mean, even a baseball would work really well. Just a hard round object. Probably something with some texture to it. I don't think you want like a metal ball or something. You probably want more like a baseball. But it definitely, I don't think you want a tennis ball. I'm not sure that a tennis ball would be strong enough, because it does give a little bit. But I would just basically use it just like that to push the LEDs right down in. It worked perfect, and I used it and just flew through the rest of the headliner after I figured that out. This one here is actually used to force the top fabric down around the LED. In a lot of cases I didn't need it. I just kind of got them in line and then pushed it down with my fingers. But there were a couple that I went back over and just pushed it down like that. There's a hole in there just the size of an LED. A little bit of a lip to it. And it's round, so it's easy to hold. And I will have these files on the website, so you can download them and print them yourself if you want. The ball, honestly, it can be a baseball. I think it'd probably work fine. Just some kind of a round, hard ball is what you want. This is a little more specific. You may not have something to work. Maybe a ratchet set, if you have a small enough tip. Small size ratchet. I guess it'd be like a 5mm. I didn't actually check sizing on that, but somewhere around there, that would work too, probably. Alright, so that's the basics of the tools that you're going to need. So as far as the headliner itself goes, as you can see, I've got all the LEDs. You've got the basic mesh over top. Now this is actually, you're not going to easily be able to do this without replacing the top of your headliner. So if you're planning on doing this, you're going to have to put on a new headliner material itself. Now I went to Jo-Ann Fabrics and they had literally headliner material. They had a couple different colors. I went with black. So originally I had like a Kryptek material on here, but I mean, I quickly realized that by drilling the holes in the back, they're 9mm. The holes in the front are 5mm. If you have 9mm all through here, it's just going to look like a mess. So the best way to do that is to take your headliner off if you've got one on there. If it's a factory, don't worry about it. I took my Kryptek liner off and then started drilling all the holes. And then once the holes were all done, I went ahead and put the liner back over top. And that used a spray adhesive. Now there are a couple kinds. I guess here's another tool I didn't think about. Spray adhesive automotive headliner. This stuff is really, really good. Permatex. Previously, I was using up some 3M headliner adhesive. This is good. It's not bad. It does work, but the Permatex is better. I mean, this stuff stays sticky for days, and once you put this headliner down, it is not coming back up. Like, this stuff was really good. So I recommend the Permatex over the 3M, but the 3M works well. One thing I did pick up at Joann's was DIY craft. This is garbage. Do not buy this. Do not buy this for your headliner. It holds like crap. So that's my tip for you. Don't buy that. The other two, either one will work. I think the Permatex is a little better, and I got it at my local Advance Auto Parts. So I think AutoZone sells the 3M, and Advance sells the Permatex. So if you got an Advance, I would go there to get it. As far as the headliner goes, I mean, you can use like a heck of a lot of materials. I mean, there's tons of videos out there as to what you can use. I was using a Riptech fabric or something. I don't know. It was with a Cryptech design on it, and it kind of worked. But for an LED layout, it had issues around some of the turns, around some of the corners, getting it down in there because it didn't want to stretch quite as well as some of this stuff does. So definitely keep that in mind, because you want to make sure that whatever material you get effectively gets into all of your nooks and crannies without any issues. So it's got to be somewhat flexible, like a fleece or something like that might work. But like I said with this, I went with actual headliner material from Joann Fabrics. You can actually look it up online and then just ask them where to find it in the store. But it works really well. So definitely highly recommend the headliner fabric at Joann's. And then, yeah, okay, so obviously the basics of the headliner fabric, you're going to have to remember where your holes are. That's also going to be a factor in your grid. Now you can see I got a dead zone right up here. Where'd it go? Right there. So what that is, that's one of the holes where the headliner actually attaches to the roof of the car. I think there's another one down in here or something. It actually just missed the LED somehow. So that's something to consider when you're laying it out and everything. Holes like this, if you've got a sunroof, moonroof, anything like that, that is going to be a large void, and you're gonna have to figure out how to work around that. The way the controller works, you have grids. There are 4 outputs on the controller itself. So in my case, I am using all 4 outputs. I have, for safety purposes, I have divided the headliner up into 4. I didn't really have to, but if one LED goes out, the rest of the line is out too. So using all 4, I'm pretty much guaranteed that at least 3/4 of the headliner is going to work. Not necessarily 3/4, because I didn't do it exactly quarters. I also worked with the headliner itself, so I wanted to go a little bit wider up by the front, so you can see I'm actually 25 LEDs across to this point. So I had to make this one section because you want to set them up as grids. You can see in here I've got extra LEDs. That makes up for the LEDs that are not running in here. That way I can set it up as a grid. So I had to sacrifice LEDs that will be behind the headliner to make the grid work properly. Then from there, I went with 14 count, because it's exactly 28 to here. And I went to here because of this hump. And I didn't really want to run the LEDs up around that hump. Instead, I just cut it out and went around the actual hump. So this is the start of my 4th grid right here. So it's a small grid. But as you can see, when I load the grids up into the app, it connects them seamlessly, and I will show you how that app works. It's pretty cool. So this is the app here, and basically, to start with, disconnect. So this is a Wi-Fi based controller. It is a direct to Wi-Fi though, so all I got to do is pull down, go to my Wi-Fi settings, and it pops right up, SP801E. So I'm going to go to the SP801E. I'm already connected. Then I'm going to open up the app. Now this is a Bandland X is the name of the app. Obviously the information on how to download it is with the controller. I already named my headliner. My car is a Forester, so we'll be going into a Forester. So I click that. I have connected now. Now as far as grids go, if I go to add screen, so like your normal screen will pop up in the scene screen. I was in playlist, so I went back to screen to the scenes. I've got a few scenes already done up. That one was kind of cool. There's the Among Us character. Tried Mario stuff. There's smiley face that doesn't look too bad. That's supposed to be Bowser. That's supposed to be Peach. So you got to remember there is some limits to what you can and can't do. It's definition based. You can kind of make some of them out, like the smiley face pops up real good. So it's going to be a lot of playing to figure out what you want to preload and what works. I don't like the Mario stuff as well because it is a little harder to make up. Whereas these, you can pretty easily tell what that is. And you can pretty easily tell what that is. But these are GIF files that I found online because you can sideload GIF files. So if anybody wondering how to get that one, that is a GIF file that I found online and I downloaded. So back to this. So we're in scenes and we can go to add. Now this is where you're going to set up your layout. So when I hit layout, I can do edit layout or change the layout. I'll go ahead and change the layout. So I want to go to, I've actually got 3 layouts set up. For the GIF files, I found that you have to be squared. So if I do the full grid, it tries to stretch the GIF to fit the grid. And that didn't look right. It messed up. So I had to mess with my grid size to try to make it more square. And that's why this doesn't fill the entire grid up. There's just little caveats to the app and how it works, but I do have 3 different grids and I can choose each mode for each grid, and then I can load those into my scene tab and then load those into a playlist. So it's kind of cool because I can be switching between grids in a playlist. So like I go to grid 1 and I go to the regular effects. Now these are all of the regular effects here. And I can choose between any one of them and load them right up. So let's say we just go with the scrolling fade here, and I push it, the little TV button in the top there, that's to push it to your headliner, or well, you know, whatever you're working on. And as you can see now, it's doing that mode on the headliner itself. And then from there, there's some settings that you can change, if it'll focus here. You've got adjustments and speed, and each one has different kinds of adjustments that you can do, vertical, horizontal, and you can kind of see the effects up here as you're playing with it to figure out what you want. You have your brightness dial. Like I said, I mean, oh shoot, go to there. If I dial this up, it's just way too stinking bright. I don't need it that bright, and it's drawing way more power at that. This is plenty of power for a headliner, and I'm drawing probably a quarter of the power, being at 50%. Once you start hitting that top 100%, you're really pushing it on the LEDs. So something to consider when you're playing with it and how you want to set it up. So then once you get a layout set up, let's say you want to add a couple layers, I can go in here and I can add another layer. And this layer can be anything I want it to be. Scrolling fade, diagonal fade. You're just adding another style of mode. We can do the fading pixel, sure, we can do that, or falling object. Doesn't really matter. Just whatever you think looks good. You can add a third layer. I don't even know if there's a limit. Yeah, 2 of 3, so you can add up to 3 layers. Once you get that layers that you want, everything's set up, you've adjusted all your settings, and you've done everything to where you're happy with it, then you're just going to hit the record button down here on the bottom. Name your mode. We can call that color flow. How about that? Yeah. Then you hit record. Now it's recording that scene. It's done. And we're going to exit out, go back, and now that is the newest mode on my scene page. Then you've got profiles where you can actually set different profiles for the headliner, and then you can go to those. So, you know, I've got the animated one, which just cycles through. Some of my various pictures and stuff. And then I've got my playlist 1, which is probably what I'll be running most of the time. It's got my logos, which is another thing I've still got to kind of tweak. You know, loading pictures in there, it's low definition, so you got to keep that in mind. You can adjust your count for each show. So like my GIF files are pretty slow or short show modes. There's not a whole lot of frames to them. So I've got 4 counts on both of those. And then I've got 1 count on the Mario one because it's actually a long slideshow. So that way it kind of it doesn't flip between each one really fast. It extends it. There's no way to actually extend it when you're creating the scene, unfortunately. It pretty much just is what it is. So this is the way that you can extend it when you're actually playing it. Obviously, if I go over here and I click on this, it'll just continue to play it in loop. But it won't go through down the list. The only way to do that is with a playlist. So, got to kind of play with that a little bit. You also have the speed dial up here and your brightness dial up there as well, so you can adjust the speed of it, make it go a little bit slower, a little faster, speed it way up, whatever you want to do. And then obviously the brightness, but I like it right about 50%, doesn't blind you. So that's pretty much it for the app. There's a lot to play with here. There's a lot of stuff to do. You really can't mess anything up in the app. So, you know, go to town, play with it. Just, you know, remember your grids, remember how everything's laid out. Kind of figure out how to play with things. Like when I did my logos, that's why I had 2 different style grids. One going long ways and one going the other way. I wanted to make sure that I did that. I could run long ways for long pictures like my logos, because otherwise the logo would run this from one side to the other, and you're talking about a big picture in a very small area, so the density is not there. I guess one other thing for your grids. So when you're adding a grid, so you get into this screen and you want to add a grid. Now you set your canvas style. The canvas is your main background. I'm at a 43 by 25 is my grid space. So basically what that says is how many LEDs tall by how many LEDs wide. I'm 25 at the top, and I'm 43 long from this corner to that corner. So that's mine, 43 by 25. And like I said, I can flip that to be 25 by 43 if I want to go this way and go tall by long, and that just flips the canvas around. Then you can hit add. Well, shoot, I'm already at the 4th. I can just delete this one. This is an 1125. So I deleted that one. There we go. And I'll add it back in. So when you hit add, you're going to have P1, that is your first output. You have P1, 2, 3, 4. Those are your 4 outputs. So I'm going to hit that. My width is, what did I say, 25 and 11, I think. And that is my width. And then this is your LED flow. So that basically is which direction are the LEDs flowing. And that's probably really hard to see. But you can see it's saying which direction they are flowing in. And so in this case, mine is this one right here. But that's all on how you wire it up and how you run your grid. But that means that you have a lot of options in how you run your grid based on this layout. So, oh, and I did that wrong. Okay. I'm at 11 by 25. It shows you how bad my memory is. Okay, 25. There we go. So then I'm going to move this into its place up at the top. And that's how I did all my grids. So I just lined them up to where they are on the actual board. And hit OK, hit save, and now I've got the grid. It will ask you to name your grid. I named it just 1, whatever. And then I can load up a little Pac-Man. Goes clear up to the top there. And I've apparently completely did that wrong. So, it just shows you. You gotta play with this stuff, because it is still a little confusing to me, at least. So if I go to this, I go to this, and this would actually be this. Right? Yeah, that one. Now save, go back to Pac-Man, load him up, and there it is. So there you go. So if something doesn't look right, you probably have something wrong in the settings for your gear or for your grid. So definitely check that out to make sure that you have that all laid out right. But there are some better tutorials out there on the actual app and how to use it, but this is a basic just to give you an idea. From there, just play, have fun, figure it out. It's not too bad. I'm still figuring it out myself, like I said. But alright, I'm going to flip this over and give you guys an idea of what the back looks like. So on the back side of this, now this is where your tape, your chalk lines are going to come in handy. Basically the way I did it, I figured up where I wanted to start. So, you know, where do you want that first line to be? And you got to get it perfect. So, like in my case, how wide is it from corner to corner of the headliner? Where is your center point of that headliner? And then just set that. You know, this is very, anybody that's done like framing on a house or something like that, that first line, it can be pretty important. So you definitely want to try to make sure everything's right. So, you know, I just found that focal point kind of right there, and figure up about how far from the edge. And obviously it's a little bit difficult to measure when it's like, you know, it kind of comes up and stuff. So I mean, this could be a little bit tricky. Take your time, measure twice, cut once, you know, like they say, measure 10 times and, you know, drill once. Because you get that first line set, and you're sitting a lot better. So I got my first line figured out and where it was going to be. That's when I used my grid to, once I got the first hole drilled, put my grid over that hole, slid my little tool down in there to hold it in place, and then lined it up with my line that I created, which you can't see anymore for some reason, but and found my second hole, drilled a hole there. Once you got those two corner holes set, you could pretty much go to town just drilling each hole without really having to worry about it too much. But one thing that I did come up with to probably help you out, because one thing I noticed is that there was a little bit of play in all this, so this could twist just a hair. Just as little as I just twisted it there is going to throw the entire headliner off. So you notice in the middle here, I have them getting really close here, and that is what happened here. So what I recommend that you do is to get your first line So once you get that there, go ahead and hit these two. Then get onto here, figure out where your line is, go ahead and hit those. And so on till you get that first row. Once you get the first row done, that's where you're going to use this. So what I was able to do with the chalk line, I could actually just clip it into the hole, pull it down to the other end, do the same thing down here where I figure out my center point, I figure out my corners, I figure out how far down I want to come roughly. Now this is, you don't want to drill your holes at the bottom because you're spacing between each LED, you want them to be perfect. So you're pretty much going to end wherever you end, but I wanted to be about here, so I figured it out. I marked my holes of where I wanted to be, and then just kind of marked like, 1.5 inch for each one to get a basic idea of where that chalk line should be. And then I secured the chalk line at the top, pulled it down, and just snapped my chalk line to create that row of where each LED should be, and that gave me a guide point. So that way, once I got past my mistakes, which were pretty much all up in here, I was able to just take this grid and follow it down, starting up here, secure it in place with my pins, and then just kind of visually look at the holes and try to line them up with the chalk lines. And that would give me an idea as to where roughly those holes need to be. And this is a little bit forgiving. I mean, you can see in mine, there are some of the chalk lines still there. Some of them have worn off. I'm not perfect through them all because I was trying to keep it all straight. I mean, if you start getting a little bit off, like I was off up here, and then you just instantly offset back to your chalk line, it's going to look horrible. So I kind of just had to just accept that I messed up here and kind of slowly move it back into shape down here and get it up. I wish I could do this headliner over again. Aside from the time factor, but if I could do it over again, I would obviously do a lot better job, because now that I figured out the chalk line, that was huge. That helped a ton for me to get back on track. So by the end, I was sitting pretty good. If I kept doing what I was doing up there, this would have been a nightmare down here. So it helped me to get back on track. So you can see as you come down here, I start to get back in line as I slowly edged everything back where it should be to try to keep everything as straight as I could, working with the, unfortunate aspect that I screwed up top. So don't do what I did. Do better. Learn from my mistakes. And then everything ran down into here. So the next part was getting all the LEDs in. The basic for the LEDs, you're going to want to go start at a point. Now, probably the best idea is to figure out where you want to run all your wires and stuff. If you're doing grids, that means all your data lines are going to be on one side of the headliner. Well, more than likely they should. I mean, that's the best idea. Store them all on one side. You do have 50 LEDs per strand. And ideally, you don't want to cut the strands, so that's something else to consider. In this case, I did 25 across on the top. But I'm only 23 across down there, so I did have to run strands in the middle. That's something, maybe you plan ahead a little bit better than I did, and you figure up, okay, I want to go how wide, and I've got 25, and it divides your width by your LEDs, and maybe you design a grid that gets you exactly 25 with the same spacing that I needed down here. And that would have saved me a little bit of hassle, because then all of my wiring could have been right on the side here instead of all over. So that's something else. Hindsight, it was too late. I couldn't go back, so I just ran with it. But something to consider. Being the strands are 50 count, and you really only have to run wires and power and injection and all that stuff along this main line if you can do 25 across all the way up. So the way I did it, I started here, and I go up, go over, go down, over, up, and just the whole way down the headliner, just like that. Like I said, being that these are 25 tall, on the first 11 rows here, I was able to start here, end here, start here, end here. So it goes up, comes back, splice into the new one, add my power injection here, You can see a little bit of a mess here. This is how I started with the JSTs and ended up having issues with continuity on my wiring when I went to go plug everything up, and that's when I came up here and I just had to start figuring out, okay, where the heck did I mess up? Because I messed up somewhere. I ended up figuring it out. But one of the things I ended up doing was cutting out some of the JSTs and just going soldered. I think it's a better connection, but I think this is a heck of a lot easier just to sit in a chair at a table and add JSTs to all the connections and test them all in one by one on a controller to make sure they're working. I actually used a Ghost controller to test all the strands because that's what's on my workbench. So you use just about anything because these are just RGBs. So as long as it can do an RGB LED, you can use that to test each strand and make sure that they're all good to go. And, you know, because once it's on the headliner, it's a little bit harder to work on. But, so as far as that goes, yeah, so I had the inputs, power. I'm using 18 gauge for my power, which is overkill, but I would personally rather go overkill than underkill, being this is a headliner and I do not want to ever have to pull it out. And then, yeah, so in, out, just think like that. So you come, the input here, output goes into the input here. There's your output, input, and it just keeps going down the line, up and back and forth. Power injection for each. So you just figure that this wire, this power wire, is actually injecting power to, like this one here. So this one here is actually injecting power via this into this JST, which goes to this output and this input. So it's actually injecting power to both of these strings here. I'm also injecting power in here. So it's just power injection, power injection, power injection. Like, once again, overbuild this thing, because if you wimp out a little bit and you don't do as much power injection because you don't think you need it, and then later on down the road you have some issue, wires are overheating or something because you're running too much power down one of these little wires, like, come on dude, you don't want to pull this headliner out. Do the power injection every 50 LEDs just to be safe. I would go 18 gauge. You could probably get away with 20. I would go 18, just be super safe. And it's literally just power. You're just running 5-volt power to each one of these sections. So I've got it all spliced together in here. I come into the main power line now, being that all this is 18 and it's splitting off and it's going in all different directions. I run my main power as 14. Once again, overkill, but a heck of a lot less likely that I ever have to pull this headliner and do anything to it. So I used 14 up to there, spliced it, and just ran them off in all different directions for the different sections that I've got running. Obviously this is section 2 in here, and it runs up into a little cluster up here where I've got some stuff, and then I've got section 3 comes over to here. This is where section 3 comes in, and I've got the whole mess of stuff up here too, and then I've got section 4 down here. Now I do have the power isolated. That was something that I did after the fact. Originally I had it all wired in together and links and all that stuff, but trying to figure out where my issues were, I realized that if you can wire them off as grids power-wise and you have continuity, all you got to do is isolate the grids. So like literally I can just cut this here, and now that's one grid all by itself. There's no power or anything coming anywhere because it all comes in right here. And then I can check for continuity and say, okay, that grid's fine. I can check this grid, that grid's fine, this grid's fine, that grid's fine. So if you have continuity, it's going to be a heck of a lot easier to find it if you've only got one power source going to each grid. So that's why I did that. Another thing that I did run into was I did have a couple dead pixels. I mean, out of 1,000, they weren't dead. The way that these work is when you turn off the lights, you might get an LED that stays on. It might be blue, it might be red, it might just be really faint. For me, I wanted to do this once, do it right, be done. So even the couple LEDs that were barely lit, but they were just slightly lit, I went ahead and I pulled them, I cut them, I replaced them. That's a little bit tedious. You can see one of them right here. I had to while it was basically in the headliner for the strand, I have to pull out the bad LED. I basically just pushed it down from the back side. So on the back side, I figured out which LEDs were bad, pushed them through, flipped it over, found the ones that I had pushed through, cut them out, replaced them with the good LED, and then it was good to go. Flipped it back over, check for continuity again. You check for continuity. You can do that 100 times. You're never going to regret it. Check for continuity. Then I went ahead and plugged it up. Everything was good to go. And fortunately, I didn't fry anything. So, yeah, that's a good day. And yeah, so what else? Any little tricks? So this here, you'll see here, these are just loose LEDs. And I showed you on the other side, basically the reason being is that you're setting this up as a grid. If you just go from here and then jump up to here, that's not going to be a grid setup. It's going to get all confused. So the way I had to do it was I had to work around by adding LEDs for this section where I didn't have anything. And I probably could have added one here, obviously, and maybe one here, but whatever. At the time I didn't do that, so I'll just send it. But these are just going to set up on top. I'll probably like zip tie them or something so they don't try to like fall around or anything, but they'll be fine. They don't get hot, they don't really get that warm, so it's not going to be a big deal, so I'm just going to leave them like that. I had to do kind of the same thing down here because I did have this one rogue LED that was sticking out a little bit further, so I had a sacrificial 3 LEDs for these 3, basically imitating what would have been in those 3 locations. So keep that in mind. When you're laying this out, it's very important to kind of pre-plan. How do you want to lay out your grids? How do you want to lay out your holes? How frequently do you want to have your LEDs? I think 25 count is a really good width. It would be 2 pixels denser than what I'm running. I don't know the math offhand. I'm at 1.5 inches, which in my head sounded good, but now thinking 25 strands, it would have been like 1.4 inches, something like that. I don't know. I'd have to do the math, but it's going to be very similar to what I got, but it is going to be a little higher density, not much, but just a little bit. But it'll get you that 25 across, so you get the down back. So that means you can have all of your wiring on one side. And it doesn't matter which side you want to do. So you want to do passenger side, you want to do driver side, but you can have all your wiring on that side, and then the rest of this, you won't have sections like this. Like I only have this because I did 23. So you can definitely clean a lot of this up if you run them 25 across, 25 back, being that they are 50 count strands. So yeah, I don't think there's anything else I can think of. I'm going to try to get this in the car this week. It's raining today, so it's not going to happen today. Plus, I got to get caught up on some other work. But it will be on this video, so obviously you guys are going to get to see it. But yes, I will get that done. All right, a little bit scatterbrained here. This thing is still, the wheels are still turning on this. There's a lot of improvement to be done on this process. I know it. I'm giving you guys the information that I have learned in hopes that you guys can figure out even better ways to do it, because I think there's a heck of a lot of potential with this, but I think there's a heck of a lot of work initially, and I think we can get past that. As a community, working together, trying, if enough people try this, I think that we can really nail down this process and make it something that a lot of people can do. Now, there is a cost impact to this. These are not cheap LEDs to begin with, being that the capacitors are built in and all that stuff. Trust me, you do not want the eBay 5mm LEDs in a headliner. It is going to be a nightmare. You're going to want something like these that are pre-wired, capacitors built in. It's going to make your life 10 times easier. This headliner would have been a nightmare using the stuff you can get on eBay. Not to mention, you can't wire these up like a taillight, because you got to remember flex. When I pull this up and I move this around, like this is flexing a lot. You can't use all metal pins and do that. So you're going to have pre-wired setups like this. So Unfortunately, I don't think there's really going to be a cheaper option. I don't know if I can get my quantities up on purchasing on this, if I can get the numbers down a lot. I don't think I really can. I mean, I had to buy 5,000 LEDs just in this batch, and that's a small batch. Normally I'd probably buy like 10 to 15,000, but I don't think I'm going to be able to get the price down significantly. So that's something to consider if you do want to get this done. It is not a cheap endeavor. Depending on it completely depends on how many LEDs you get. So I'm not even going to say a number, but you can see the link on the website and figure up about how many LEDs you want to run. This is a Forester, so it is a long vehicle. I ran 1,000 LEDs, but it is also like a 14-foot headliner, or 12, 10 foot, I don't know, some long headliner. So, you know, keep that in mind. You don't necessarily have to run as far as I did if you have like a sedan. If you have a moonroof, you're going to have a huge section without LEDs, and you can work around that in the app, depending. I mean, you got zones, so maybe you got a zone here and a zone here and a zone here, and then your fourth zone is back there. You know, whatever you got to do to get it all laid out. But yeah, definitely want to see you guys trying it out. Definitely want to try to get some of these kits sold, and I'd love to see some of these start popping up at car shows, man. I think it's cool as heck. But you know, definitely subscribe. Obviously, I will, at the end of this video, we will get it in the car and you will be able to see it all lit up and going. But yeah.